This morning on BRN, care for one infant costs a family 10% of their yearly income. Joining me now is Alex Gailey of Bankrate. Alex, so great to see you. Thanks for joining us on the program this morning.
Thanks for having me here today.
Yeah, it's a great study, and I'm so glad we could spend a few minutes talking about the study, and I want to get your opinion on a lot of information that was in the study. Let's talk about the basics, though. Infant care, according to the study, in at least 40 states, 10% of a family's yearly income. That's a significant amount from my perspective. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so when we did this study, we found that really no matter where families live in the US, childcare is a significant cost burden. And we zoomed in specifically on full-time daycare for one infant to get an estimate of how much a typical family would have to allocate towards that to afford it. And what we found is that in the majority of states, in 48 states in the District of Columbia, families are having to spend at least 10% of their income just to afford full-time daycare for one infant. And that's just one child. So many families have two children or more. And so these estimates actually may be under what families are actually paying. And when you look at the national figure, the national average for full-time daycare for one infant, that is higher than what a typical household spent last year on healthcare, food, and transportation. The only expense that was higher was housing. So this just shows that childcare is likely the second biggest expense in a family's budget.
Yeah, really important. And we often talk, at least in the retirement industry, about the silver tsunami. So those are, I guess, mature people that are retiring, and so there'd be a great transfer of wealth. But you need births. So we have I guess my point is we have an aging society, and we want to incentivize people. We want it for people who want to have families. We don't want it to be a cost burden. Get your thoughts on that.
That's right. And family size has been decreasing over the last few decades. We know families are getting smaller. There are probably a lot of reasons for that, but cost could certainly be playing into people's decision not to have children or to have smaller families. And we know that childcare, daycare, and preschool costs specifically have been outpacing out inflation now for over the last 3 decades, over 1.5 times faster than overall inflation since early 1991. So there are a lot of costs that come with raising children and having a family, and childcare is a significant part of that. And it's something that, while infant care tends to be the costliest, even if you look at different age groups, it's still very expensive. And this is an expense that families are having to pay for years, and that does affect their ability to save, pay down debt, and build wealth for their future.
Yeah, that's a really important point in terms of, I guess, building that wealth, outside of the home. Having savings, retirement savings is probably the second or third largest part of your savings nest egg. In terms of, are there ways to drive down the cost, or what goes into the cost of childcare? Is it the fact that it's hard to find professionals? Because you need a person who's got licenses and certified and has the insurances, right? So where are those costs? What drives those costs going up?
That's certainly part of it. 70 to 80% of childcare costs is due to staff costs because there needs to be a high ratio of adults to children for basic health and safety reasons. And the childcare market is highly regulated, but it is private. And so childcare providers don't get a lot of funding from the state or federal funding. The exception was during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so they have very thin profit margins. So they have had to pass a lot of those costs off to families, just to try to keep their doors open over the last few decades. And unfortunately, families are the ones that are having to pay for these costs. We also know that with childcare providers, generally they also have a lot of staff turnover, and they struggle to keep people in the door because they tend to not pay very well. Unfortunately, those are the people that are earning some of the lowest wages of all occupations.
Yeah, I kind of liken it to, there's the caregivers that provide care for a lot of elderly people, dementia, Alzheimer's. They're also not paid well, but they have an important, or often unpaid, they have an important role. And so if you don't have these individuals taking care of children, because in most cases, and I'm one of these people, I don't have children, but I'm one of these people where my wife and I both work. I have a brother. He and his wife work in support of their children. and their family, to help their family out. That's the case mostly in families today, is that both parents work.
It is the case, and there's a lot of two income earners in a lot of households, and so there is this conversation that frequently comes up when people have children is, well, should one of us take a step back and either work part-time or leave the workforce force altogether to be caregivers because maybe that makes more financial sense in the moment, because
Hmm.
childcare is so expensive. However, there's no wrong or right answer there, but when that decision is being made, what needs to be considered is the earnings that you're losing out on over those years, retirement savings you may be losing out on
Yep.
because you may have access to a 401k plan or a certain retirement account through your employer that you no longer will have access to. And it can also stall your career progression. And a lot of times it is women who
Yep.
are making these decisions and taking a step back and being either part-time or full-time caregivers.
Yeah, and absolutely, and this is such a. I think it's a big issue because if you're not having children in a society, and by the way, the United States, I think, is no different than Europe and Asia and other parts of the world. The birth rate is down, and I think a lot of it probably has to do with some of these costs, although it probably varies by culture and country. How do you cope as a parent? So let's. I want to end on a kind of a positive note if I can, because I don't want to be Debbie Downer today or Jeffrey Downer. How do you cope if you're a parent with these higher costs? Are there things we can do? Are there tax credits and other financial incentives to help the parents out in terms of managing these higher costs?
There are ways to manage these high costs. Really the only way to bring costs down is if you qualify for childcare subsidies at your state or local level. But I do highly encourage reaching out to your state or local family services office and seeing what financial assistance, what services you qualify for. I think a lot of families write that off and think that their income is too high to qualify, but New Mexico is a good example of a state where the income threshold is pretty high at almost $125,000 for a family of four who can qualify for childcare subsidies, and childcare is essentially free. And so that's a state where many families can qualify. And I think that across the board, it's worth doing some investigating to see if you can get some financial assistance. In addition to financial assistance from state or local government, you should also be focusing on the things you can control, such as your budget and tracking your spending. I think staying organized is really critical for families when you're managing what's going in, what's going out for multiple people in a household. It's really important to have a system in place when it comes to budgeting. And if you don't have money set aside to help pay for those childcare costs, then you're going to have to do either two things: increase your income and cut costs, likely a combination of both. And when it comes to cutting costs, there's a lot of strategies there. You are likely going to have to get creative. Maybe it means limiting vacations for a while, or shopping only what's on sale at the grocery store that week, or using coupons more. I mean, every little dollar counts for families. At least that's what I've been told when I've spoken to them, is that they are getting really creative when it comes to their spending and their budgeting.
Yeah, I just watched the movie. My wife and I watched the movie Queen Pins. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie. It was about couponing. It's a really good movie. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. We have no endorsement, but it was a great movie about couponing, and I don't want to spoil it, but it was a great movie. And the last thing I'll say, I'll just kind of end the interview by saying, Alex, I think families have had a difficult time since the pandemic. One, their kids were home, they couldn't go to school, they had to work and manage the family. It's a lot of stress on the family. So this is an area that hopefully people can continue to help manage. Alex, we're going to have to leave it there. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Excellent study. And we look forward to having you back on the program again very soon.
Thank you for having me here today.
And don't forget to subscribe to our daily newsletter, The Morning Polls, for all the news in one place. Details, of course, are at our website. And we're back again tomorrow for another edition of BRN. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.